Hey everyone, welcome to the Cornerstone Family Talk podcast, a conversation designed to help people grow deep and live tall. There's no better place for people to grow than in a family. So welcome to the family. You'll find out very quickly that this is a compilation podcast. One episode you may hear an interview. The next may be a story or a testimony, or we may be diving deep into theology or church leadership. So welcome to Family Talk. Let's get started.
All right. Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm Robbie Pilcher, the campus pastor at Cornerstone Marion in Buena Vista. And I have today with me here Gabe Theis. And Gabe, tell us right quick, you know, who you are. And I know I have you here because of your position at the school and because you're a Christian elder in our church. But tell us a quick intro of who you are.
Well, I am Gabe Theis, and I'm a athletic director and assistant principal at Sly County High School. Love my job. I taught U.S. history for, I guess, 13 or 14 years, and then moved into the administrative area of education. And so that's who I am in a nutshell. I'm busy, but love it.
Okay. Well, you're obviously a history major, and so one of my questions I want to ask about is you know what sparked that interest in history? Why did you choose that as your major and that as your career?
Well, it's always kind of interested me, you know, just, you know, the things that have happened in the past, and wars have always been fascinating to me. And so I liked the subject matter, enjoyed the subject matter, and really didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated high school, and took a couple years off and worked in painting industry and did that, and then decided I needed to go back to school. And so I liked history and went into that, and I liked kids. I always have. Always volunteered with kids here at the church. And so it was one of those, why not education with history?
Right.
You know, and I like to tell people that it wasn't really a plan that I had, but it was a plan that God had.
Yeah.
You know, He just kind of directed my steps. And, you know, when I talk to young people and they don't know what they want to do, I tell them, listen, trust God and take the next step, because He's going to put you where He wants you to be, as long as you're trusting Him and staying in His Word and things like that. So that's how I got there. But I really do enjoy history. It's one of those things that it fascinates me.
So as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, you know, about your education. Was there one person, one teacher, or maybe not a teacher, that you would say was instrumental in you making that decision to do that?
I wouldn't say there was one particular person. You know, Janie Downer was my government teacher in high school, and I really enjoyed her class. But I wouldn't say that I was like pushed into education because of that, or pushed into history because of that necessarily. It just kind of God directed my steps.
Right. Cool. It just interested you, and felt God would go in that direction.
That's right.
So that's cool. You know, a lot of times you follow God one step at a time, and it leads, you know, to what the purpose that He's got for you.
That's right.
Another question for you: what's it like being a Christian today in the public education system?
You know, to me, it's not what a lot of people would think. You know, a lot of people think that you have to walk on eggshells and things like that. But luckily, I live in an area of the country where I can still, you know, display my faith and it not be something that people, you know, try to lash out at you about, you know. And so I just try to live who I am each and every day. And if there's ever consequences to that, we'll deal with that when it happens. But, you know, to me, it's not any different than, you know, living a Christian life in any other occupation.
Okay. So you're living it out, even
That's
though
right.
you are in the midst of that. We're going to talk about government as we talking about this stuff, and where did the idea of government originate?
Well, you know, I would say that it originated with God, you know, right there in the garden. because he put Adam in the garden and gave him one rule and some suggestions. You know, what his job was. I shouldn't have said suggestions. Probably a job. Gave him an occupation. You know, we were made to work, and he said, "You're in dominion over this. Name the animals." And he gave him one rule, and that one rule was, "Don't eat from that one tree."
Right.
You know, and so I think that's where government originated. Now, as far as like structured governments and things like that, it's when Adam and Eve left the garden and started populating the earth. You know, and when people are living together, you know, there's going to be problems. You know, people are not always going to get along, and as a result, when they started living in towns and cities and larger populations, they had to form some sort of government to keep peace between people. You know, so that's, to me, that's where it all started, and that's with God.
Yeah. I know that a lot of the things that you see, you know, up until the flood, people were violent. Violence was so prevalent on the earth. Everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. And I think really, I think it did originate with God. God saw there's a need for some civil authority to help keep the violence from not taking over.
That's right.
And
you know, and that's one of the things that I've always been kind of fascinated about with government and has it evolved over time too, is, you know, the world started with just that one rule that God gave Adam.
Yeah.
And then as we started messing that up as human race, it went to 10. He gave us the 10 commandments. You know, and the more we mess up, the more rules are put on us.
Right.
You know, it's really, freedom exists in rules. You know, when we stepped outside of those rules, when Adam stepped outside of those rules, and when the 10 Commandments stopped being followed by people, that's when more and more rules get put on you. So freedom really exists in following a simple set of rules.
I've often said that, you know, God puts those boundaries there in your life for your blessing and for your good, you know?
Yep, and that's where freedom exists.
Yeah, that's a cool thought. Well, this podcast is scheduled to be published in July, and you know, obviously July 4th brings thoughts of the founding of our nation. So I want to ask you, what role did Christianity play in our nation's founding?
I think it played a huge role. You know, many of the founding fathers were Christians, and even those who weren't, a lot of people like to say that certain of them were deists and things like that. But even those who were deists, I mean, deism is simply that there's some sort of force making everything work. You know, and maybe they didn't know what that force was or whatever, but if you really boil it down to it, that force is God. You know. And so I think it played a huge role. And if you read the works of the founding fathers and what they believed and things like that, you can find Christianity and the teachings of Jesus throughout it. You know, and so I do think that it was somewhat divine, but also, you know, it goes back to when rules are put upon you that are unjust. You know, they felt like there was a time to break back and fight back against those things.
I've heard this debate about some of the founding fathers thought that we should celebrate Independence Day on July 2nd, not July 4th. What's that about?
Well, in June of 1776, they put a committee together of 5 people. It was Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams. And those 5 guys then, and that was at the request of one member of the Congress, and he said, we need to split from England. And so these 5 guys started writing what became the Declaration of Independence. Well, they brought it to Congress on July 2nd, and that's when Congress voted to declare independence.
Okay.
And so it wasn't formally adopted by Congress until the 4th, but it was voted that they were going to accept it on the 2nd. Okay. And so even John Adams, who was part of that committee that wrote it, he actually would not attend July 4th celebrations.
Because he thought it should be July 2nd.
That's right. You know,
Wow.
and he actually wrote in a letter to Abigail, his wife, during that time that July 2nd for generations and generations was going to be celebrated, you know, as a point when we broke from England, and ended up being July 4th was the formal day. And so, you know, he wouldn't attend July 4th celebrations because he thought it should have been July 2nd. You know, we can all be a little petty at times, I guess.
I guess so. Well, thinking back to those times and what was going on in our nation during that time, what do you think were the biggest challenges that faced the founding fathers that they faced at that time?
You know, the challenges really for them at that time, I think, was breaking away from a country they had been loyal to, that they were part of, you know, and it was treasonous. You know, I'm sure there was a lot of fear because if they're caught doing this, they're going to die.
Yeah.
You know, but as far as governmental challenges and stuff like that, it's establishing something from nothing. You know, you had the 13 colonial governments, and you had the old British governments, and you had even going back to the Greek and Roman governments. You know, they brought in all of that stuff, but combining that all to find one system that was going to work for us was extremely challenging. You know, and there were social things going on too that they had to discuss, slavery being one of them. You know, and
so that's an issue even then already?
Yeah.
Already?
In the Constitution, when they started writing the Constitution, slavery is addressed a few times. You had the 3/5 Compromise that talked about representation in Congress. You had the Slave Trade and Commerce Compromise, where, you know, those issues almost stalled the adoption of the Constitution, but they had to compromise on those issues in order to form this government they knew they needed to have order in the country.
I've wondered about that before. And how did they come up with their idea to get equal representation?
Well, you know, as far as equal representation, that's not necessarily something that they truly wanted.
Really?
You know, they wanted the representation to be based upon the size of the state, and that's why we have a House of Representatives. You know, but the large states didn't like, or I mean, the small states didn't like that because they felt like they were going to be pushed around. Yeah, you know, and so that's why there's a compromise to add it's called the Virginia Plan or Virginia Compromise, to add another representative body where every state had equal representation. That's why we have a bicameral or two-house legislature. Okay.
Well, now, even during this time where they're breaking away from England, and I think about the Civil War as being a war where you had brother against brother. But I've actually done some research on my family history, and in my family, you had parents that were loyalists, and then you had their children that were patriots.
That's right.
And so the Revolutionary War was in a way a civil war as well.
It was. You know, because a civil war basically is a country fighting against itself, and that's what this was, because these colonies were technically English colonies. And so you did have brother against brother, relative against relative, and a lot of, you know, families were split over it. And a lot of that goes back to what I was talking about a minute ago, this was treason. Yeah. You know, it was, and I think a lot of the loyalists, one, they operated out of fear, or actually two ways they operated out of fear. One is fear of what's going to happen to them, you know, and two is fear of, can we do this on our own? You know, is this something we actually can do? And is it worth fighting against the strongest military in the world when really and truly we have it okay? Right. You know, but there was others who thought we could have it a lot better.
Well, from a history major and history teacher, why is history important to you?
It's important because we can learn so much from it. There's a lot of people that say history repeats itself, and I don't necessarily like that term because I don't think history itself repeats itself. It doesn't go, exactly the way it was. But there are themes in history that continue to come back up, And I think it's important to study history, and history the way it was is because history's ugly. There's some ugly parts of history that people don't want to talk about sometimes. And there's a move in our country and in society as a whole to just try to eliminate parts of history.
Right.
And I don't think that's healthy, because if you eliminate those parts of history, you're doing away with the positive impact that people who fought against those things and were able to get rid of those things, you're getting rid of their positive impact. I like to study history the way it was because it is ugly. It is, it's bad in a lot of instances, but I think it's good to look at that because if we don't, we're going to forget that it can be bad, and just try to look at things through rose-colored glasses, and that's just not the way it is.
I heard somebody one time gave a definition of wisdom, and they said wisdom is learning from somebody else's mistakes.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So if you could look back over history and keep yourself from making the same mistakes that previous generations made, that's wisdom. That's walking
Absolutely.
in wisdom, and that's the benefit of that.
Absolutely.
What do you see as important for the younger generation to know about our history?
I think it's those ugly things, because they don't need to just think that it was all easy.
Right.
That it was easy to get where we are today, where we have the freedoms we have today. That those freedoms were fought for, they were suffered for. There was a lot of bad stuff that happened that made us who we are. So I think it's important to look at those things. And I think it's also important to be able to look back at what people have done in the past, how they did it, so that we can, one, learn from it, and two, maybe adopt that, go back to understanding why they did that. Maybe it wasn't popular, maybe it wasn't even good, but this is the reason they did it. This is the reason it worked or didn't work, and these are the results of it.
How about this? Do you look over our history? Can you recognize times where you actually see God's hand at work at certain points in our history?
I can. I think it may be hard for me to pinpoint something right now, but there's numerous stories of, people stopping in the midst of wars or battles or whatever and praying, and the outcome happened that they were praying for. And so there's lots of that. And then just the fact that people were able to survive here, dropped off of a ship onto land that they knew nothing about. And one of the things that I always look back at that amazes me is I go into the woods a lot of times. I love being outside. I go into the woods and I'm like, the forests that these people encountered back then were probably this dense or worse, and they had to make fields out of it in order to make crops. That doesn't just mean cutting down trees. It means getting up the roots.
Oh, you got to dig those stumps up.
Yeah, you got to get everything out of the way so something can grow. It's just amazing to me, those people, and the resilience that they had and stuff. And many of the original people who came here were Christians. And I think, talking about divine providence or, God at work here, the fact they were able to survive with hostile people around them, hostile conditions and all of that, it really points me to believe that God wanted it to be here.
That was a miracle in itself that they could do that. I remember, when I was young, and we seemed to pride ourselves in the United States as being a melting pot. You would hear that term, and people from all different races and ethnicities and backgrounds would come together here, and we were stronger together. There was strength even in our diversity. And now our nation seems to be more divided than we've ever been. And it seems that politicians and media and other cultural influencers focus on our differences and on driving people apart instead of promoting unity. What is the answer for this?
I could go two different ways on this. You've got a bunch of political answers, but I don't believe that's the answer. The answer is Jesus.
Yeah.
Because his love is the only thing that can bring people of differing beliefs and backgrounds together. And so in order for all of that to go away, it's going to take the country turning their hearts to him. There's some political answers I could give you of, how to do that, but really and truly, those are the things that are dividing people. Is those answers, because Jesus is love. God is love. And even if we try to speak in love to somebody right now, it's difficult for them to hear it, because if you don't say exactly what they believe, they think you hate you. They think that you hate them. That's what's been driven into us, is if somebody doesn't believe exactly what you believe or do exactly what you say, that they don't like you. And that's not necessarily the case. And so it's going to be a heart change in order to make differences. There's just no way to do it without that. And the only thing that can change our hearts is Christ.
Well, I think that, in my personal life, when you realize that every person you see, whether their skin's a different color or their accent is different or whatever it is, that they're different from you, but we're all made in the image of Christ.
That's right.
In the image of God. And it's one of those things where you realize that there's value. There's inherent value just because of that.
That's right.
And when you can value others that are different from you, that's a good thing. And if Christianity promotes that, then that is the answer. That is.
To me, it's the answer to all problems, but I think that specifically it's the answer to ours, because there's no way to get rid of that division and hatred without true love coming into play.
I heard David Barton. You're familiar with David Barton?
I am.
I know you
I
are.
love David Barton.
Wall builders, and I heard him talking one time, and he was talking about Isaiah 33:22, and I can't remember exactly where he got this from, but he was talking about it being the model that our founding fathers used to come up with our three branches of government. And the verse, I'll just read it, Isaiah 33:22 says, "For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, and the Lord is our king. It is he who will save us." And that's from Isaiah 33:22. Had you ever heard that before? That
I haven't.
Really?
This is the first for me of hearing that comparison. And if David Barton said it about American history, I probably believe it.
Yeah. Well, he's got the book from whenever.
That's right.
17 whatever to.
That's right. He's got
that.
the original document where one of the founding fathers used that verse in Continental Congress, I'm sure. But, it's credited back to Baron de Montesquieu saying that we need an executive, legislative, and judicial branch. But, I mean, if that – I don't think I've ever stopped and heard that verse when I've read it.
Yeah.
That because it does. It's
there
judicial
it
branch,
there
judge,
yeah.
Lawgiver, legislative branch, and king, executive branch.
And I love how it says it's he who will save us.
That's right.
That's what we were talking about before. He is our hope.
That's it.
You know what I mean? That's it.
Yep. Absolutely.
My next question is it seems that corruption is just rampant in government today. And my question is over history, is this new? Is it worse now? Has this always been the case?
My answer to that would be, is sin new? Because really and truly that's what it is. Trying to drive people apart, trying to get what's yours without you or get for yourself what's not rightfully yours through corruption, it's sin. You know, you can go all the way back into the Sumerian times and the Egyptians, and even up into Greece and Rome, and see corrupt politicians. You know, this is nothing new. I think that a lot of the sin we see in the world today, that a lot of Christians try to cry doom and gloom about, you know, and if we don't turn this around, we're going to fail as a nation and all that stuff. You can see that in every society, you know, throughout history.
It's a sin problem.
That's right.
I love that answer.
It's a sin problem.
I mean, it's a sin problem.
Yep. And so you can see it throughout history. And I think the reason that more people talk about it today, or more Christians talk about it today, than in the past, is because it's so far out there now with technology, and at the click of a finger, you can have anything right there in front of you, you know. And so I think that's where a lot of Christians go is, you know, it's everywhere. And yeah, it is, but it's not a new problem. It's just more available, more readily
accessible.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as a Christian, what do you see as a Christian's role? You know, and what is our responsibility as Christians when it comes to government?
Well, first of all, we've got to pray for our government. You know, no matter who's in control, God put them there. You know, that's scriptural.
That's tough for people, though.
It's hard for me. It's hard. Like, that's one of the things I question God about most. Is like, your word says that you put this person in authority.
Yeah.
Really?
He allowed them.
Right.
He allowed them
That's
to be
right.
there. But you know, you look at history, man. There was time where he allowed other nations to come in as judgment because his people weren't living the way they should.
That's right. That's right.
So sometimes we might get what we deserve.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. But, you know, the first thing would be to pray. And the second thing is, if you want something to change, you know, yes, God's the only one that can change it, but he put us here as instruments of change. You know, he put us here and gave us a commission when he left this earth to take him to everybody, you know, and we can do that through our words and our actions. We can also do it at the ballot box, you know, by voting for people who have Christian values. You know, sadly, it's hard to find a lot of people who get to that point, you know, that place in politics with those Christian values now, but we can find people who align with what we believe and vote. Yeah. You know, I've heard a lot of people say, I don't even vote anymore. It doesn't matter.
It does matter.
It does matter.
It does matter.
It absolutely matters. That's really and truly, that's the only thing that we can do to change anything in the government. You know, aside from crying out to God to change it.
Right.
You know, but our own actions, voting's where it's what we've got to do.
Right. I would think too, to get involved. You know,
that's right.
We need Christians involved in areas of influence. We need them involved in city governments and in county governments,
that's right.
and all the way state governments, all the way up. We need that Christian. Like you're talking about, it's hard to find people. I think a lot of times, you know, the people with the Christian values have gotten so frustrated with the situation that they just don't participate in
that's
that.
Right.
You know what I mean? They're not running for office. They're not. You know, you got to be willing to serve.
That's right. That's right.
You know,
absolutely. And, you know, really, you talking about city governments and county governments and stuff like that, if you want to boil it down to what really impacts your daily life, it's going to be those governments closest to you. You know, the federal government gets all the attention, all the media attention and stuff like that. But the things they're doing on a daily basis don't have nearly as much impact over us as what the city governments and state governments are doing.
Yeah. Well, you know, the first thing you said that we need to do is to pray for our governments and those people in government and everything. So that's kind of what I would like to end out with is would you lead us in a prayer for our nation, for our government? So,
Absolutely.
all right, let's
Absolutely. Lord, I thank you for this nation that you've allowed us to live in. I thank you that in large part it was established on Christian values. I thank you that we've created a government that has lasted for so long and created a haven of freedom for so many people around the world. Those masses that have come here and those who have gained freedom by being here. And I thank you for that. The fact that we can be a light to the rest of the world as a place of freedom. And Father, I pray right now for our city governments, our state governments, and our national governments, Lord, that their hearts be turned towards you.
Yes, Lord.
Because we know you're the answer. We know that your teachings and your word is what's going to change hearts. And without heart change, we can't have political change. And Father, I pray that as we continue on in this country acting as Christians in a nation, that we be a kingdom of God first and foremost, that we be your sons and daughters, that we be your servants, that we would get out and serve those around us. And in doing so, it makes people realize that there's something different in us and something that is worth looking into. And Father, I pray for our leaders right now, the people who are currently in leadership, that you give them wisdom, that you guide them, direct them, so that your will can be done. Because that's what we want as Christians. We want what you want. And I thank you for, again, the opportunity that you've given us to live in such a free place. Though it may not seem like it's in the right place a lot of times, we know that people have felt that way for decades. And Lord, we thank you for the opportunity that you've given us, and help us to be people who take that opportunity and make something of it. And I thank you for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Gabe. Appreciate you being here, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Family Talk. You can stay up to date on our family conversations by subscribing. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or on TikTok. All those links can be found in the show notes. You can also hit the share button and share this episode on social or with someone that you love. And finally, dropping a rating and telling us what you think of this episode will help spread our conversations. Thank you for being a part of our family here at Family Talk. We'll see you next time.